I'm so excited and grateful to have Murray here with us this evening. Murray and I have been talking with us for weeks about how we wanted to contribute to Virtual Burning Man and Camp Mystic. And this talk is on the future of music. Today's been all about the future. We're talking about the future of music. And he's going to play a little samples for you in the first hour. And then the next hour, he's going to give an experiential music performance, which is just out of this world. I had the honor of seeing Murray perform live in person, and it was just a spectacular experience. And he's going to give us something like that this evening. I want you to know he spent hours setting up, getting this just right, so the sound is going to be terrific. And so here's a little bit about Murray. Murray Hidary is a multidisciplinary artist and tech pioneer, ever pushing boundaries and guided by a strong desire to help people find their purpose. As a composer and pianist, Murray is now focused on his immersive musical experience, Mind Travel, which you will experience at 9 p.m. Pacific tonight. Over the past 5 years, Murray has created over 600 mind travel experiences, reaching over 100,000 people live across the globe. Mind Travel brings together Murray's passions for contemporary classical music, visual art, theoretical physics, and wisdom traditions. They are the 4 pillars of an integrated experience that seeks to explore an understanding of the universe at both the visible and hidden levels. Murray is also a certified meditation teacher through the Vedic Center and certified grief counselor through our House Grief Support Center. His live piano to headphone experiences at the temple at Burning Man every year have become a powerful healing and anticipated contribution to the playa. Murray, thank you so much for joining us. Take it away.
Thank you, Robert. It's great to be here with everybody. How's everyone doing? I'm thrilled to be participating and contributing to this Burning Man. And it's just a different Burning Man. And I'm excited to explore something new with each and every one of you. So I'm here at my piano, as you can tell. I usually don't have the kind of luxury of bringing this piano to the playa, so it'll be a treat tonight at right after this talk to get on the piano and share a musical journey with you. But before we did that, I wanted to spend the next hour in conversation, in exploration. And in keeping with the ethos of Burning Man, I've put together some ideas that I think are pretty out there, pretty radical. They bring a lot of different, kind of connecting a lot of different dots. And it's some things I've been thinking about for a long time and kind of bringing all these pieces together. So in keeping with the theme for today, which is the future, futurism, community, those are the elements that I'm building off of. So I'd like to jump first into the notion of community. So let's go ahead and begin. Okay, I'm just going to get this presentation set up. Great. Okay. There we go. Fantastic. So when we think about community, I think all of us would agree that the elements of religion, race, culture, geography, interest, these are all kind of types of communities or ways that communities organize, these various organizing principles that kind of are at the foundational level of different communities. And we'll go into a lot more detail on some of this. Of course, the interest category is something that can be tremendously vast. Of course, you can build a community around pretty much any interest or hobby or vocation, profession, etc. So these are kind of the big buckets of community as we go into this exploration. Now, if we look at some of the trends of what's actually happening here in this country, in the US, in regards to some of these particular community trends, let's first start with religious affiliation. And this is obviously a real key one because one of the core elements of community in the US is assembling around religion, building a community around religion. And if we look at the current trends, we'll see, as it shows in this graph here, that the number of people that are identifying as religiously affiliated, in particular with Christianity, is declining quite significantly over time. And the number of people that are identifying as religiously unaffiliated, the bottom line, is increasing pretty rapidly. And so this is a very interesting trend, and I think you can agree that if you kind of plot out the trajectory points of these trends, that you'll certainly see a point in which they cross, where there would be a point in time in the future where more people identify as unaffiliated in terms of a religion than people who identify as a specific religion, in particular Christianity in this country. And the estimates are about 20 to 30 years from now, that would be the case. A majority of people in this country would be identifying as unaffiliated. If we continue, there's communities that are built around geographies, of course, where people live, where they grow up, their families, and other reasons like jobs and careers and what keep people in certain geographies. The graph on the right is interesting because while on the one hand, we're seeing communities in religion where they're potentially kind of opening up to new influences. When it comes to geography, we're seeing actually what's interesting is that fewer and fewer people are actually moving from city to city. Now, the graph on the left showing that about 37% of people kind of stay in the same town they grew up in. An additional 20% or so stay in the same state. And then kind of you have other numbers where people are living in 2 states during their lifetime, or 3 states, or 4 states. One of the interesting kind of analyses of this is that the reason why we're not seeing a tremendous growth in the number of people that are moving around actually has to do with the growing population, and in particular, the fact that a lot of our population is getting older. And so most moves are made when people are pretty young. And so as the population ages, we're going to pretty much see this number, not rise that dramatically. So that's an important element. Another element is that there's a lot of families that have 2 career couples. And so it becomes a little bit more difficult to relocate, especially if one of the partners has a very stable position that they don't want to give up. So couples tend to kind of stay in a certain location. And of course, during this current economic downturn, we're also seeing, decline in migration as well, and we see that. So kind of interesting trend points. Let's continue on to the next slide here, and there we go. And this is interesting, the population trend. So we're seeing in this last decade, for the first time, actually since 2016 to 19, is the first time in decades that the number of people that identify as white in this country, and again, this is defined as identifying as white, non-Latino, or Hispanic, then that number is actually, for the first time, has gone negative. So it's been a very interesting trend over the past decades, as you can see. And if you kind of play this out, then you see on this slide here that the total US population is coming into more of a mix. And if you look at the right side, specifically for people under the age of 16, it is really dramatically shifting. And so what this points to, now of course it'll be very interesting to see the 2020 census data when it comes out, because some of this data is more recent with some research studies, but the under age 16 data is back from 2010. So it'd be very interesting to see whether that trend has continued into 2020 or has stalled or reversed. But assuming the trend line continues, then what we're anticipating is, again, in that 20 to 30 year horizon, a majority of the country will actually identify as non-white. So you're looking at a very interesting trend line, right, of combination of a majority of Americans at some pretty near future point identifying as unaffiliated in terms of any religion and being a much bigger mix of ethnicities and cultures and races. Very interesting trends. And I don't think it's, of course, any coincidence, as an aside, that what we're seeing around our country today is clearly a direct consequence of certain segments of the population realizing this and potentially it creating some fear for certain populations. Again, that's just kind of an aside, but important to kind of see the big picture here. So let's continue. And I think it's important to, look at this through the lens of, entropy. It's, of course, a concept in physics, but when you think of entropy in the kind of physics reference, you can imagine a bunch of, air molecules in a corner of a room, and over time, those air molecules will just want to spread out and diffuse throughout the room. That's just the law of physics. And things go from a certain type of order to a certain type of disorder. And that is just the nature of the universe overall. And so everything from molecules in a little room or in a box to the expansion of, galaxies and the inflationary universe. So we can actually apply that, in this case, metaphorically, to the idea of these population and religious trends, etc., as it follows that type of trend line. Now, when we think about community, assuming that we want to kind of start from scratch here, what would be the kind of organizing principles? What would be the kind of things we want to optimize for? Well, I put a list here together, and by no means is it exhaustive, but I think it does encapsulate a lot of the elements that people do look for in some type of community. So we have love and belonging, we have support, both physical as well as emotional and spiritual, of course, the notion of ethical and some moral guidance, personal expression, wisdom, self-actualization, really meeting our full potential as human beings, and then the spiritual development of what kind of lies beyond there, an understanding of the kind of universe and the nature of things more deeply. And I think if we look at why people have belonged to communities, or be it geographic based, right? They're looking for support locally with, kind of raising their families, etc. To religious communities, they're looking for ethical and moral guidance, as well as other types of support, of course, love and belonging and connection. So I think you'll find all these elements, are what humanity has attempted to achieve through various experiments in community. So what I'd like to do now is kind of, assuming we just kind of start from scratch, like how can we engineer community in a modern futuristic context? Well, the first is, if we look at, let's first split off the origins of kind of the need for humans to come together for two main purposes. One is the idea of human governance, just kind of understanding that we're social creatures, social beings, and so we must, live together, we thrive and survive together. And so what kind of rules do we need to regulate and govern ourselves as individuals and as collectives, whether it's tribes or whether it's megacities, and of course countries. And over, centuries and centuries and centuries, we have evolved that process. And today, arguably, of course, we have the Constitution. We have the U.S. Constitution. There are other constitutions and systems, but let's look at the U.S. Constitution. And it is an evolving document, an evolving philosophy, an evolving methodology for human governance of both the individual and society. If we were to look at, for instance, just the Bill of Rights as an example, or the first, or all the amendments, they're really about individual rights and community rights, starting from, of course, the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom to petition the government. We have, of course, controversially, the right to bear arms. We have the Third Amendment, of course, which is, you can't force to quarter soldiers in your home. The government can't force that upon its citizens during times of peace, and it goes on and on and on. And a lot of them are about justice and the judicial system, right? And like a fair and speedy trial, the Sixth Amendment, right? And individual rights to a jury trial in the Seventh Amendment. And it goes on. And really gets very detailed in terms of protecting the rights. But it's important to understand, even as we get to, of course, we have, the right to vote. We have, many other rights, of course, women's suffrage. And what's interesting is that attempts at adjudicating morality, for instance, when it came to alcohol and prohibition, that was pretty much a failed experiment, and we reversed that. And so, certainly, this is not a perfect system. It's a flawed system, as humans are flawed, but it evolves and it self-corrects. So, again, from the human governance side, I think that we can move forward with a healthy, cooperative system. Moving on from there, we have tremendous advances, especially in the last 50, 100 years. Advances in psychology and the social sciences, where it's shifted to real research and evidence-based blueprints for living life. And I'll just share one example from Martin Seligman. He is a preeminent pioneer in psychology, particularly positive psychology. And he talks about these notions of living life, so the pleasant life, the engaged life, and the meaningful life. And the pleasant life, as he describes it, is leading a life that really enjoys, appreciates, and is engaged in the material world in a very positive way. Again, this is not necessarily a hedonistic attitude. It's simply enjoying the fruits of life in a positive context, and that we should enjoy those fruits. The engaged life, and again, I'm simplifying a lot of this. Of course, there's a lot of work on this and writings on this and books on this, but just for purposes of this short talk, we'll move through this. The engaged life, and this is where a person really begins to find that purpose, can engage with life in a very direct way through their vocation, through their hobbies, through their pursuits. When we talk about someone being in the zone, being in the flow of life, and the flow and the focus of their activities, we're talking here about leading an engaged life. And you can see that the level of fulfillment is going to be increasing, of course, as we go up this ladder. And then finally, the meaningful life. And the meaningful life is, how he describes it, is living a life of service, where you're kind of reflecting back on society and sharing the kinds of things that have fulfilled you in an engaged life, and potentially a pleasant life, in a more meaningful and connected way. And if one were to lead a life like is described, then the level of happiness kind of skyrockets. It's pretty remarkable. So assuming that one of the roles of a community is to really engage its members, to facilitate, to help lead a productive, fulfilling, and happy life, then there are structures for this. There are blueprints for this. And a community could come together and really facilitate this for each other. So again, these structures exist. And if we put the right structures together, both for human governance when it comes to kind of the minimum standard of ethical and moral behavior, right? Again, let's remember that the Constitution, our laws, are the minimal set of standards for behavior, not the aspirational standards, right? So here we're talking about, okay, this is more aspirational. And these are things that can be facilitated by a community with real evidence-based approaches. Now I want to introduce the concept of music, but I want to introduce it in a very different way. So let's start to think of music a little bit differently. Let's think of music as a facilitator, as a container for all different levels of the human condition, okay? And in that way, I think of music as a technology, okay? Why? Because just as a technology helps facilitate us doing certain things in a better, faster, more productive way, so too music can do that with all these aspects of actually living life. If we just look back at Martin Seligman's framework, right? Music is used. We know that we use it in a pleasant life. It's entertainment. We go to concerts, right? It accompanies sports games. I mean, it's something we sing happy birthday. We dance at parties. I mean, we infuse music into our daily and regular activities, the milestones, the celebrations, as well as the sorrows of life, when someone dies or other things that are going on in the human condition. We use music as a facilitation. Of course, when it comes to other areas, there's tremendous possibility. Now, I'm using this picture here of an iceberg because, again, we really want to reframe what we think of as music as something much vaster. And in the same way that I can show you this graph of light, and of course, only a small fraction, it's actually about less than 1% of the spectrum of light is actually perceivable by us. Our human eyes, our senses are very limited. So the visible light that we see, right, and of course we know that white light breaks down to the various components of the rainbow, as you see here, these different frequencies in the spectrum. But all of that is only about 1% or less of what's out there. And so there's really a vast hidden universe available to us. And the same is true for sound. So just like the spectrum of light, there's the spectrum of sound. Again, there's different frequencies of waves, different types of waves. One's electromagnetic, one's mechanical, but still waves nonetheless, frequencies nonetheless. And the audible sound range, again, about from that kind of 16 or 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, is what our ears can pick up. Remarkable. But there's a lot that lies outside of that. So we have kind of just like this infrared light and ultraviolet light, it's the same with sound. The sounds we can't hear because they're either too long or slow or too fast, and the frequencies are too high. And so, what does that allow for? Well, let's now talk about music as medicine. And the future of medicine, a large part of it, has what I call music as part of its solution. Again, using music as medicine. Now, in this case, it's not necessarily music we can hear, but it is music nonetheless. Now, in the case of ultrasound, this is actually a brand new breakthrough that has been announced recently, where if you take cancer cells, right, and of course we know that cancer cells are always kind of mixed in with healthy cells, right, which is why radiation, chemotherapy, etc., really causes tremendous harm to the body, even though it could save someone. But at the same time as killing the cancer cells, it can also kill the healthy cells. Well, the same with ultrasound traditionally. Ultrasound would kill both the cancer cells and the healthy cells, and then it just becomes kind of balancing act, and it's never a sure outcome. A new technology has created a very targeted pulsed out ultrasound, and as you can see on the chart on the right, when it is applied, only the cancer cells are essentially vibrated to death and destroyed, but the healthy cells are not destroyed. This is a tremendous breakthrough, and it truly is using frequency, waves, sound, music, albeit music we can't hear with our ordinary senses, but it is using that same idea. So very powerful. Equally, or if not more powerful, is a brand new announcement. This is some of the most cutting edge work that's being done. It's a company called Neuralink. It is an Elon Musk company. And this company is taking this device that you see kind of the components here on the screen. This is a chip that actually has these little fibers. That's the bottom part, the tail there. And these fibers actually do go in your brain. It is a link between computers, digital, and your brain, which is an electrical device and an electrical technology. And yes, they will be planning to implant this at the top of the skull, directly connected to the brain. The machine on the right is actually the robot that exists today to do that surgery automatically. And they've actually done this, not on humans yet, but they've successfully done this with pigs. Very well taken care of pigs, I might add, from what I understand. They have like veterinarians on staff and everything. Pretty remarkable. But I'm showing you this chart here because they just announced this breakthrough where this pig has had one of these chips, essentially, these neural links in, I think it's I think it's Gertrude, this one, I can't remember, in her brain. And she's had it and been totally fine in terms of behavior and mood and all the signs of a healthy pig for months. And they now have attached sensors on all of the 4 limbs, and they've been able, through reading the brain activity, to actually anticipate, to predict the movement of the limbs. Now, what the remarkable part of that is that the implications are that, say, for a human being that has a severe spine injury, let's say the spine, the nerves are literally severed, and there's no connection, there's no communication between the brain and the limbs. Well, through this technology, various sensors in the brain through this neural link can be connected to devices on the limbs and can actually move them automatically with brain thought. And it would be as if it was the person's own limbs. Now, that could be for mechanical limbs or the person's actual limbs that are just not reacting because the nervous system is severed. So people literally could potentially walk again, use paralyzed parts of their bodies again. Pretty remarkable. And the other implications are endless. We can talk about it for hours, but I want to keep moving. But again, I bring this up because this is directly using frequencies and waves in combination with the powerful brain and this technology. This, to me, is music as medicine, because it has to very carefully be scored, if you will, for the exact purpose. There's also, of course, music therapy. And again, in music therapy, we're using the language of emotion to treat emotion. Dance therapy uses music and movement to create somatic healing. And this idea of coherence versus decoherence. So research has shown that if you have a group of people listening to music in the same room, their brainwave states begin to resonate at the same frequencies. Now, it's remarkable that it does that. And there is an implication. The implication of that is that the group starts to feel more cohesive, connected, and in community. Just remarkable. So let's take it now the next step. We're going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit further now. The next step is to consider music as the universe, to really open up what we conceive of music as and apply it to the entire universe as it is. So really looking at the full spectrum of what's available to us, just remember that kind of light spectrum, some of it that we're able to see, other parts that we're not, right? There's a vast hidden universe. So let's keep that in mind. And let's remember that the entire universe is operating as waves. And this is what de Broglie, the incredible physicist who won the Nobel Prize in 1929, he won this Nobel Prize for this idea that matter, that all matter, exhibits wave-like properties, right? So stuff made out of particles operates like waves. And this is what we call the wave-particle duality, but it's critical to understand that everything in the universe operates as waves, as frequencies, vibrations. Now, this is happening, of course, on the grandest of scales, and it's also happening on the smallest of scales. So I wanted to just kind of show the extremes, right? Because we can understand, like around us, we understand light, we can understand sound, and our microwaves are using microwaves. We go to the doctor, we get X-rays. These are, of course, different frequencies, and we can conceptualize that. But we really should think of it on the edges, pushing the edges, the fringes of experience in the universe. And so if we think about something really big, right? Well, it doesn't get much bigger than gravitational waves. And this is something theorized by Einstein, but not proven till this decade, believe it or not, just this past decade, because of the advances in technology like the LIGO, sophisticated tools and technology to measure these subtle kind of shifts in the fabric of space-time. But we have proven it. And essentially, what you see here, by the way, in this image is two neutron stars, a simulation, two neutron stars kind of spinning around each other in gravitational kind of, attraction. And they're coming together, and they eventually merge, explode, and it shoots out this kind of radiant gravitational energy, which is literally rippling the fabric of space-time. And some of these gravitational waves can ripple out for billions of light years. That's right, billions of light years. And specifically, we can not only measure them, but we measure the frequency so specifically and exactly that physicists can tell us what key they're in, literally what note they're playing on kind of this proverbial piano of the universe. One of them recently, some years ago, was in the key of C. I mean, it's quite remarkable. The universe is singing. The universe is playing some grand symphony. And these are happening in all different directions and undulating and creating this kind of cosmological choreography. It's quite remarkable to think about things in that context. Now, if we go to the really small, and in this case, I'm giving an example of what would be the smallest notion of thinking of kind of the universe's music. Well, you have the notion of the quantum field. Now, here, all particles, essentially what a particle is, a simple way to think about it, is just a kind of a disturbance in a field, and scientists call this the quantum field. And so it's important, of course, to keep in mind that you can't really have a field without a particle and a particle without a field. They really kind of work in symbiosis. But at the smallest levels, there are these undulations in this quantum field. And that is the kind of genesis of life and of matter as we experience it. And again, that is fluctuating constantly, these kind of expanding and collapsing wave functions, as it's called in quantum physics. But let's continue. Just understand that there are incredible wave-like motions and frequencies happening at the smallest level, the quantum level, the subatomic level, the particle level, as well as the massive level, right? The cosmological level, the universal level, right? Like gravitational waves. And there's a lot of other stuff that we're just starting to get a glimpse of an understanding. Only 4% of the universe is known to us, is measurable by us, is experienced by us. That's all the stuff in the universe, not just on Earth, but in every star, in every galaxy, across the universe. That's only amounts to about 4% of kind of stuff out there. And the other, again, we can call it energy, matter. Again, it's different than anything we know of, but about 21% called dark matter, about 75% called dark energy. Physicists are just starting to understand what some of this is. It's a tremendous mystery still. But understand that most of the universe is still veiled from us, is still hidden from us. This is a simulation. This is just kind of a representation of what that could look like if you could put special glasses on to see what the universe actually looks like. The white lights are clusters of galaxies. This is from Stanford University, by the way. Clusters of galaxies. And the rest of this interconnected web and kind of vibrational waveforms you see here are representations of dark energy and dark matter. So quite remarkable if we can really settle into what's potentially out there. Now, why waves? Why are we talking about waves constantly? Aren't there other kind of phenomena out there? Well, turns out that waves are ubiquitous. The spectrum is ubiquitous. It's near infinite because waves, and here if you look at this kind of quick little chart here, you look at different types of waves, right? Kind of sound waves are on the left side, right? They're kind of the movement of air molecules, water waves in the ocean, right? Transverse waves. Of course, we have electromagnetic waves, like light and X-rays and all the things we've been talking about. So a lot of different types of frequencies here, and different ways they operate. Some are electromagnetic, some are mechanical, meaning there's actual kind of matter moving, like bumping into each other, right? Like air molecules for sound. Or water molecules for waves, but they have something in common, right? Which is the idea of propagating energy, propagating energy. And that's really the key thing here, that waves are the most efficient way to propagate energy, whether it's mechanical or electromagnetic or you name it. And so, here in this picture, you see this, this woman training with her, fitness ropes. She's, could be at CrossFit or something. And she is transferring energy into these ropes to get her workout. And the ropes, as you see, operate in a wave-like fashion. The energy doesn't just shoot from one end to the other. It makes the rope go up and down. And that is because that is the most efficient way for her energy to move through the rope, to get from one side to the other. It is simply the most efficient way. The molecules literally bump into each other and they kind of roll up and down, and that is how energy moves through material objects in this case. And if we were to look at, this is one of my favorite concepts in the universe, actually. It just gives me such kind of pleasure to think about it. It gives me joy. It gives me real joy. The universe truly is inherently lazy. It wants to do the least amount of work as possible. And this is a technical principle in physics called the principle of least time. Now, the diagram on the right is showing you that if you have kind of a point A and a point B, right, you see there, point A is in the air, imagine, and point B is beneath the water, okay? So imagine there's like an ocean and your point B is beneath the water. Now, if you wanted to send light from point A to point B, well, you would imagine that to send a light from point A to point B, well, a straight line is the fastest way to send anything. So why not send it that way? Well, it turns out that we know that light refracts when it hits water, and the point B will kind of experience the light at a different angle than how A is sending it out. Now, it turns out that there's a reason for that. It turns out that it's faster for the light to travel using the solid line on the right, even though it's angled and longer than the dotted line on the left. And that's because of its propagation through the different elements. And so somehow the light is figuring out that to get from point A to point B, it's going to take this other route to get there faster and more efficiently. Something remarkable. This also applies to the principle of least action. And the principle of least action states that if something's going to get from point A to point B, all the options are evaluated, right? This is the probabilistic wave function, right? Like every possible route is going to be evaluated. And the reason why the really strange routes, and I apologize, the blue might be a little hard to read on the screen, but there's a lot of squiggly routes from kind of, one side to the other. But only the red line is the most direct, and therefore it is the most likely to happen in the real world. So while other options could happen, we don't experience them as happening because the value is too high, right? Meaning the distance is greater, so it's not the least value. So the red line is the least value, therefore it is the most efficient, and therefore it's what the universe chooses. It's quite a remarkable principle, but it is universal, truly universal. So in order to really get deeper now, right, we kind of went through a lot of those elements of building a community, right? Believe it or not, even through all those ideas. right? We went through pretty much all of them. And now we want to get even deeper into what would it take to have a community that is really allowing for deep spiritual and existential exploration and understanding. And I think that, like pretty much all religions in the past, all philosophies of the past, all systems of the past, you can't really tackle that without dealing with the idea of nothing and everything. The idea of nothing and everything. Now, some traditions actually kind of punt it, and they're just like, it's too difficult for the human mind to grasp, so just kind of let it go. And something to even not pursue in that sense. But I'd like to take a different approach here, that it's a kind of a hybrid combination of kind of a surrendering along with a very powerful understanding. So if we go back to the really small and the really big, right? We talked about the quantum field, we talked about the gravitational waves. We're marrying the really large with the really small, right? Now the really large is something pretty close to everything, to the infinite, and the really small would be something pretty infinitesimal and something quite close to nothing. So let's start there. And I'd like to bring back the idea of music as an access point. Now, music operates on this principle of the harmonic series. And hidden in plain sound, meaning hidden within the music itself. If I play the note C, a low C, you're not only hearing C, which we call the fundamental, it's the lowest note being played, but you're hearing waveforms and frequencies above that as well. And in this chart, if you can read music, great. If you can't, you can see a bunch of circles and lines, and those are just different notes. And you have the first note C, you have the second, third, fourth. All those notes and those frequencies are in the note, are in the music. Your ear is hearing them and actually processing them. They're formed literally mathematically by different essentially fractions or divisions of the original frequency. So you see on the left side, you see C is at the top, the full string. Imagine these are strings on a piano or strings on a violin or a cello. And if you pinch it in half, then you would be playing the octave above, the next C, number 2 on the right. If you go down to the third drawing, you see 3 parts or thirds, and that would be the 5th above that, so the G, and so on and so on and so on. So what's happening is that music is actually the amalgamation of a huge number of frequencies combining and conspiring together to create the impact of how we think and process music. Now, how large is that? Well, this next chart is quite fascinating. It turns out that the harmonic series is quite beautiful because it marries the infinitesimally small with the infinite. And here's what I mean by that. If you look at this formula, don't let the numbers the symbols scare you. It's quite simple. On the right side of the equal sign, you see 1 plus a half plus a third. Those are simply those kind of pinchings or shortening of the string, right? First we cut it in half, so that's giving us a half. Then we cut the string in thirds, that's a third. Then we made it a quarter, that's a fourth. And each one was a different frequency or note. Well, the harmonic series continues like that forever. Because no matter how many times you keep dividing, you will never get to the end. 1 half, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, 1/6, 1/7, 1/8. The numbers, right, are smaller and smaller, yet the total number of the numbers, meaning the set of numbers, is infinite, right? And keep in mind, infinity is not a number. Infinity is a set of numbers, right? How many numbers? So we can keep on adding to this. And indeed, that's actually what happens. It just keeps going and going. Now, of course, at some point we don't physically hear it because our ears cut off at a certain point, but it keeps on going. So with each pluck of the string, right, is this expression of nothing and the infinite. And that's why music is so powerful as an access point to something large and existential in terms of our understanding of the universe and accessing that. There's another equation that also uses the same idea of marrying together the idea of the really small and the continuously shrinking with the really big and continuously inflating. And that is Euler's equation. Now, we don't have time to really go into this, but I did want to just mention it here if you wanted to research it on your own. But essentially, this comes from the core number E, which is one of the beautiful numbers in the universe, which is essentially the reconciliation, right, of kind of compound interest. That's how it was first discovered, right? In compound interest, you can actually, charge interest on an increasing number of frequencies. Like you can go from charging once a year to every 6 months to monthly, right? You can calculate the interest on shorter and shorter intervals, right? And you'll end up with a larger and larger of return, right, at the top. And those two, they kind of move in opposite directions, and they both move infinitely in opposite directions. It's pretty remarkable. But what this equation does, which is so beautiful, is that it marries that idea of the really, really infinitely small and the infinitely large with circles through pi. And right, we know that sines and cosines are these properties of circles, right? Waves, right? And frequencies. So it's marrying together two seemingly totally different areas of mathematics, and it's bringing them together and equating them, making them equal. So it's saying that frequencies and the movement of circles and movement around a circle, right, is the equivalent. It has this equivalence and relationship with the infinitesimally small and large dynamic. It's pretty remarkable. Now, we talked a lot about waves and frequencies, and as de Broglie said, the whole universe operates as waves, as frequencies. All matter operates as that. So we can actually deconstruct reality using, in math, physics, what's called the Fourier transform. Now you see the red waveform, that's a complex waveform. It turns out that it's actually made up of many, many more simple waves that add up together, that construct to create the complex waveform. So you see all the individual ones that when you add them up, their peaks and troughs and all their different properties kind of mix and match to create the red line you see. That is something that can be deconstructed. You can actually take any frequency and deconstruct its component parts. You can also do the opposite, which is construct reality. You see here at the top, you see a very simple kind of sine wave. Then you can add a second to it, right? You see the second circle underneath it. So now it's from one circle, creating one wave, to two circles, interoperating, creating a more complex wave, to three circles, to four circles. And you see that you get additive and construct, and they create different shapes. And this is the universe in action. This is the universe as music. There's truly no better way to think about it. It's the universe operating as music. Just as you play two instruments together and you create a third harmony, it's the same thing. That's exactly what the universe is doing. And this is happening not just at the classical level, the Newtonian level, meaning the level we can experience, but the quantum level as well, right? These Fourier transforms, or these kind of ability to construct and deconstruct these waves, is operating at the smallest level as well. And so we can really think of kind of a particle's momentum, right, as its sheet music, right? It's really moving through life, through the universe. It's the momentum is the score for how it should move through space. It's pretty beautiful. Now, I have a whole kind of section on quantum mechanics to get deeper into this idea, but I don't think we have the time for it. So I'm going to kind of keep going. Needless to say, there is an idea of, I just want to mention that there is a musician's or a music uncertainty principle, just like there's a quantum uncertainty principle. And it's the same exact analogous idea, just on a classical level, on a level we can experience. And it's simply that, think about an orchestra tuning, right? They hold the note for a long time, because the longer the note is held, then the more accurate it becomes. Just like with the uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics, where you can only, know either the momentum or the position, right? You can't know both. So if you were to play a note very short, you wouldn't know its frequency, and its frequency is related to time in this analogy. But we can go into that a different time, perhaps. So let's now kind of bring it to a close in the next couple of slides. In addition to this deeper understanding of the universe in terms of its existential kind of creation, genesis, of understanding the relationship between nothing and everything that we just did, between understanding the idea of the infinitesimally small and the infinite, there's other kind of wisdom available through music. And one of them is this idea of action and reaction in life. When I play the piano, I'm hitting the note, I'm listening to the note, and then that's triggering my next action. And these are a lot of metaphorical, just beautiful ideas that are available through music. In this particular case, it's kind of like an expression of Newton's third law of motion, if you will, right? Every action creates an equal and opposite reaction. And I think you can find that not just physically in the universe, but behaviorally and kind of psychologically, that there are certain patterns that play out in our lives, right, based on kind of these principles. And I want to now present kind of a mathematical koan. A koan, by the way, is, in Zen Buddhism, it's kind of this paradoxical riddle or anecdote that's used to demonstrate that, through the inadequacy of logical reasoning, right, you can actually provoke enlightenment. That was the idea of the Zen Buddhist monks. And so these are various koans. Well, I actually created this kind of mathematical koan. It's one of the most beautiful things I like thinking about, and it really does stimulate tremendous breakthroughs. And so you're welcome to use it as well, and I'll take you through it right now real quick. From 0, I'd like you to simply count the next number. From 0, count the next number. Now, you might think in your head, well, 1, 2, well, 1 seems like the next number, but no, we can say there's something in between 0 and 1. Okay, you could be like, okay, there's, 1/2 is between, 0.5 is between 0 and 1. Okay, well, what's between 0 and 0.5? Oh, well, okay, there's 0.25. Okay, what is there between 0 and 0.25? I think you get where I'm going with this. Well, so if you were to actually if I were to ask you to unequivocally state the next number from 0, well, what you'd have to do is the following. 0.00000, and you'd go on and on and on and on forever, because there wouldn't be enough zeros before you placed that little 1 as the next number, because there'd always be a 0 to add to it. I invite you to truly sit with that, to contemplate that. Now, there are many other ideas that exemplify this, and I prepared a few others, but I think we're running out of time here, so I'll save them for a future date. Needless to say, these are other examples that I've put together where we can show the union of 0, of nothing, and infinity, an infinite set of numbers, which again gives us access, right? What's the point of this? Well, the point is to give us access to what is not intuitive to us, and what certainly we would need to reconcile to to have any sense of a deeper connection with the universe that isn't only transactional through time. Oh, this is a good one too. Okay, I won't be able to do it all. Okay, just accept it. You know, as we look to the future, I also look to the past. And Beethoven, of course, Beethoven said that music is the mediator between the spiritual and the sensual life, right? The sensual meaning what we can experience with our senses. And I think he was spot on. And he didn't have all this kind of information and these breakthroughs, but I think he clearly got it. So to bridge that divide, we can turn to the mind. And the mind is kind of like the ultimate example of what we know can give us the access, but yet we can't touch it and hold it. We can certainly touch and hold the brain, we can measure it. But the mind, which represents consciousness, is still, with all the breakthroughs we have, so elusive. And it's through the mind, through its mechanisms, through logic, through reason, through math, through music, that we can gain a profound connection to the universe. As I was preparing this, I'd like to close full circle with a little anecdote. I went on Meetup, and I was kind of looking through kind of examples of communities. And by the way, I kind of mentioned this one not because I am an atheist or anyone should be. It just literally popped up. So I see this atheist online meetup. I'm like, okay, well, that's a very specific kind of meetup. And then I kept looking around, and I saw this knitting meetup. And I was like, oh, there's just such diversity out there, right? And if we think about, right, this idea of the kind of increasing, diversity, right? Just like with the harmonic series, or just like with Euler's number, right? The one number goes really, really small and wide, right? There's an endless number of niches, right? And then look what I discovered. I mean, I couldn't even make this up. I found a meetup for atheists who knit. This just absolutely delighted me. And it just drove the point home that there is this notion that we will continuously, forever, as we evolve, continue to find expressions of human expression, personal expression, that is infinitely narrow, yet infinitely large, right? Infinitely narrow, yet infinitely large. The number of meetups would theoretically go to infinity, because the narrowness of the specificity would go also to an incredibly infinitely small number. So again, the large meets the small, right? Just incredible. And that's the community that's available. All part of the human community, which is all part of the cosmos. Just profound. The community of stars, of galaxies. So many, and yet all one. Nothing and everything. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to share. You can type in a question in the chat, or if you'd like to be unmuted, and you're welcome to do that as well, but you can type in the chat if you like. I really enjoyed sharing that. I hadn't presented all that information in one talk before, but of course Burning Man is the place to do it. So what we're going to do next is we're going to move right into the music experience.